Welcome everyone. Welcome from all over the world. Excuse me. I'm Rachel Siegel. I'm Rachel Siegel, the Director of Strategic Programs at the Jewish Women's Foundation of New York. Thank you for joining us today. The Jewish Women's Foundation of New York identifies and uplifts transformational women leaders. We call them Jewels, Jewish entrepreneurial women executives and leaders, women who lead organizations and the field in addressing some of the world's most pressing issues in and beyond the Jewish community. Welcome back to our monthly Crown Jewel conversation series, where we learn from and interact with these bold and creative leaders. JWFNY supports social innovation and gender equity. We lift up visionary women leaders, both professionals and those supporting them. We promote excellence in philanthropy. We believe that a philanthropist can have $10 or $10 million to give, as long as she is intentional about her giving. Our 25 years of experience in engaging philanthropists and in grant making has led to the work we're doing today, supporting visionary Jewish women, social entrepreneurs and leaders. When you support JWFNY, you're supporting 30 different organizations run by extraordinary women, one of whom you'll meet today. Our Leadership Acknowledgement and Advancement Program introduces you to cutting-edge feminist leaders so you can know them and their work and support them. The Jewish Women's Foundation of New York is where women's leadership is valued. One of the pillars of our work is to give incredible women a platform to discuss their leadership and big issues they are grappling with, and to introduce them to an entirely new group of potential donors, supporters, hiring committees, board members, and more. We support leaders throughout the year, but our conversation today will allow you to get to know one of these incredible women in more depth. Yael Rockman is a feminist and Orthodox Israeli who has married these two pieces of her identity in her personal and her professional life. Yael is the former executive director of Kolach, Religious Women's Forum, the leading Orthodox feminist movement in Israel. Her experience also includes defending the rights of Jewish women denied their get, their religious divorce, by recalcitrant husbands. If, like Yael, you believe in using your values to inform your life, then you are in the right place today. During this session, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and we'll do our best to get to all of them. We've muted everyone to avoid background noise, so the chat feature is your best way to make sure that your message is seen. At the end of today's session, we will create an optional breakout room, which you can join for a more in-depth conversation with Yael or to ask any additional questions of her. So please stick around if you're able. And now I'm thrilled to introduce the president of the Jewish Women's Foundation of New York, Rachel Weinstein.
Thank you, Rachel. And hello, everyone. It's so great to see so many, of course, familiar faces and some new faces today. So welcome to our conversation. And hello, Yael. How are you?
I'm very well.
I hope it's as beautiful a day there as it is here in New York, although your day is done.
Yes, it's very rainy, but it's fun.
I'm excited to talk with you today. You have been involved with so many amazing feminist organizations in Israel, Yad L'Isha, the Center for Women's Justice, and most recently Kolach. And before we talk about your amazing achievements at working with those organizations, I'd love to take a step back and hear a bit about your background and how it informs your social activism.
So I actually grew up in Israel, in Bnei Brak, in a modern Orthodox family, surrounded by a strong national religious community. I went to Bnei Akiva, very much mainstream Dati Leumi in Israel. And after I got married, we lived in Jerusalem for a few years, and then we moved to Beit Shemesh. And actually in Beit Shemesh, I had a formative experience, like a learning experience that actually led me to the work I kept doing since then. We moved there about 20 years ago, and we got there. And when I came to the mikveh, the ritual baths, I was horrified by how neglected it was. The floor was broken and the walls were peeling and it was moldy and it was quite disgusting. And I've decided to do something about it. And with two other women, we actually, we have led a change that in the end, a new mikveh was built and the old mikveh was renovated. But actually, I got much more than that. I realized that we can create change ourselves. I learned a few important things. I learned, for instance, that we first about sisterhood, that we can work together, and that it's a very meaningful thing. I've learned that we can advocate for ourselves the best, because in the first few years when we started to talk to the council to do the changes, there was actually a friend of ours, a man, that he was in the city council, and he said, whenever you need to get to the mayor, we can do the work for you. But it was only when the three of us were sitting at the mayor office and we said, we need a new mikveh. We need to renovate the old mikveh. Only when we did that, then things really started to happen. I also learned that sometimes you need to hang out the dirty laundry. And I'll never forget the day that the project was stuck and nothing was happening. And for a long time, we kept pushing and we kept pushing the religious city council for them to get it going. And when we saw that it's not happening, we actually we wrote a letter to the state comptroller, the Mevaker Hamdina, and only after he received the letter, things have changed. But the rabbi of my shul, he was also the head of the rabbinic city council, he was so upset with me that day that he saw me, he was screaming at me, how dare you? How dare you? We could do it ourselves quietly. No, sometimes it's not the way to do things. If you want to achieve things, you do need to air them out. And actually, the mikveh was finished just as we were moving. We lived in Beit Shemesh for 7 years and we moved to Modi'in. But I feel very good that we've managed to make it. And since then, I realized it actually gave me a lot of strength to continue in community work, in understanding that social work is something that we ourselves need to do, and we can do it the best way.
Amazing. I mean, it's such an important point that you raised, and I think it spans so many issues across the Jewish community. Whereas, I think so often, we've been attacked from the outside that we stand so strong as a community, and we don't want to point fingers at ourselves at places where there might be weakness, where there might be challenge that we need to change. And there's this idea of like, let's just put on, a strong front and not do that. But really the progressive change makers from within the Jewish community are the ones who are not afraid to say, we have to continue to hold ourselves to a higher standard. And so we need to expose those moments when things aren't right. And, we can't be afraid. And I think that takes tremendous fortitude, especially in the Orthodox community. So what does feminism look like in the Orthodox community?
Well, I think that when I studied, when I did a second degree in gender studies, one of the lecturers used to say, it was a few years ago, and she said that she viewed the Orthodox feminism as the most vibrant field of feminism, actually. And I think that it has to do always with the fact that when you are in a conservative society and you try to create a change from within, it's a struggle that it's really, you need to balance yourself all the time, because you want to stay in order to be relevant and in order to be heard. So you can push the envelope to a certain extent, but you have to make sure that the population to a certain extent is with you, because you don't want to push the boundaries too much, because then you're out of the picture. You're not really part of the game. So this idea of trying to keep it in between. So you're still relevant, but you are making the change from the inside. That is actually the balance we are trying to do. So nowadays, I feel that it's also a relatively successful feminism, what we see in modern Orthodoxy in Israel. Kolech that I was the head of, we were dealing with lots of issues and lots of things. And in Kolech, when it founded about over 20 years ago by Professor Hannah Kehat, started with a small group of women that considered to be really the fringe. But now I feel that we have lots of soldiers everywhere. It has become a very big movement that a lot of women feel that they are part of. And it has to do with very different avenues of our life. From like, Kolech was one of the first to address the issue of Me Too. And I'm talking many years ago, before Me Too, that we were experienced in the last few years. But it was at the time that, especially by rabbinic authority, and in Bar Ilan University, for instance, there was a terrible story of students who were complaining about sexual harassment by the rabbi. And in the beginning, no one was willing to listen to them because they said, who are you against this respectable rabbi? And that was many years ago. And it was only Kolech who was willing to listen to these women and to make their voice louder so others would know about it. And as a result, they started a form of takana. And it was just the very beginning of this issue and topic that, of course, spread out later on. In terms of taking part in ritual, women in Orthodoxy want to be part, and we can feel it, for instance, as we go to shul. Like women which are national religious, they mostly have their lawyers and doctors and accountants and analysts, and they have their room and space when it comes to the working environment, but then they come into shul, they walk into shul and they're silent, they're transparent. You sit in the women's side, you can't hear, you can't see, and women want to be more part, to feel part. And Baruch Hashem, also as women are learning more Torah, they know much more. And I started when my older daughter was bat mitzvah. It's now 13 years, she's now 24, when I started by her bat mitzvah, which was just 4 days before Purim. She was reading Megillah. And I invited the women of the community and the family to our home. And she was reading the Megillah. I was reading part of it. Another sister-in-law read another part of it. And slowly but surely, the women from the community started to take part. And then after a few years that it was in my own home, it moved to the shul, to the main hall in the morning, when all the women, a few hundred women, come together and read it together. And then the whole Purim became a different thing from, just worrying about the costumes of the kids and running about Mishlochei Manot. It was more about reading the Megillah, which is a substantive part of the day. And women were in action and actively taking part of it. And so that's another avenue that Kolech and Orthodox feminist women are taking part of. Another thing is women's spiritual leadership, that if we're talking about women learning Torah for many years, women were abandoned from it. And fortunately, we're now in the last 100 years, a lot of women learning Torah in a very high level, and they're in the level of being able to be paskot halacha. But they don't have where to, they don't have opportunities to be as such. And in Kolech, we found them places they can work and have jobs as women spiritual leaders. And it's something that takes time, but we can see that it is happening slowly but surely. And the last avenue that I would mention is, of course, the problem that we have in Israel with the entwined relationship of religion and state. And as a result, everything that has to do with marriage and divorce goes according to religious law. which is very inequality for women when they come to the rabbinic court, especially to get divorced. So that's also an avenue that Orthodox feminists need to deal with a marriage that would allow women to be more apart and get into marriage which is more inequality, and also in divorce to find a better solution to the situation that we have today, where it's very uneven, and as a result, a lot of women are hurting along the way.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll just say, we're building this wonderful library to hear from all of you who are in our collective, all of our jewels. And I know you collaborate with some others. And if people want to hear more about specifically the religious divorce marriage issue and how that works in the rabbinic courts, we can go back to some of our earlier interviews with Susan Weiss for the Center of Women's Justice, and you can hear some more about that. I'm so interested on what you're saying, about, making a public space for feminist orthodoxy, right? Where everything used to have to be in private or in the home, and making this movement to be able to create public spaces around that. I can't think of a better moment than Purim to do that, obviously, with the story of Esther and Vashti, these fabulous, strong, trailblazing women, and that was the moment at your daughter's bat mitzvah that you catapulted this, forward. So I think that's really beautiful. So when we first met you, right, as the Jewish Women's Foundation first met you, you were, as we said, running Kolach, which, as Rachel said, is the first Orthodox Jewish feminist organization in Israel, which is pretty impressive in and of itself. Can you tell us a little bit more about Kolach's mission specifically? And can you share, some of the highlights from your time there? What programs or initiatives you were particularly proud of from your time there?
So yeah, so as I said before, Kolech is the Orthodox feminist movement who works for equality in the religious society, in the religious law. We were dealing, in my time, a lot with women's spiritual leadership. And what I'm very proud is actually a project that I did with New York Federation, that we were mapping the current situation in Israel regarding women leaders. We really mapped all the places that women can learn, and we were talking to them about what is their need, and also talking to communities of what they can, at this point, what they feel the community can handle. And we were and according to that, we actually build a plan and some ideas of how we can address the issue and move on. And so one of the things we found that, for instance, what women are lacking in this community is opportunity to write, that even if they're dealing with halakha, writing is something that usually they have less time for. And in order to be influential, and you need to write, because halakha, it's a lot about written things. And it's very nice, even like recently, I looked at Matan, another nonprofit that is dealing with women learning Torah. They actually have a new initiative about women writing. And I can see more and more organizations understanding the importance of doing that. Another initiative that I started in my time in Kolech was Shabbat Dorshotov, that actually is coming again after a long break because of the COVID, this coming Shabbat, where we had, the idea was to give these women an opportunity to stand in front of the community, of the whole community, men and women, in shul, on the stage, in an Orthodox shul, and teach Torah. And I started it very small, and I thought it's going to be something, I didn't know how it's going to develop, but actually it has become, just before the Corona, the one Shabbat Dorshot Tov that we had the first one 30, and the second 50, and then 80, and then 100. And we had 100 women in one Shabbat. And it's a big operation because we're talking about Orthodox observance. So therefore, they're coming with their families. It's usually big families, and they come and they stay for 25 hours in a community, being hosted, invited to meals, and speaking engagement. Sometimes at dinner, at night in the shul, and then in the morning in the shul. And what was beautiful is that we had like 100 women speaking in like 200 shuls, because in a lot of them, like I live in Modi'in, in my small street, there are 2 shuls. and therefore, if you're in the city, you can cover 3 or 4 shuls in one Shabbat. So therefore, you're getting to quite a lot of people, like 15,000, 20,000 people in one Shabbat. And then you're talking about men, women, teens, everybody see a woman standing on the stage speaking Torah on Shabbat. And it was amazing because it also created in-depth discussions in all the shuls of when they're going to let these women talk, during davening, after prayer. And there was, it wasn't just one time and that's it. It was really attracting, like dealing with the topic, a lot of places. I remember even my shul said, we don't have a problem. We would like women to come. But then when it actually happens, then you have to make a statement. You have to decide when, what, how much. And then you'll become aware of lots of things. And often when it was a successful Shabbat, and often it was, according to the feedback that we got, they would invite women to speak in other engagements. And it just made more opportunities for women. Sometimes they ask even for the same one to come again. We also made sure that people pay for it. So again, because often people say, women do a lot of voluntarily work, and rabbis do a lot of voluntarily work, but their core work is being paid. And therefore, and then they can decide whether they want to come or not to this certain engagement. And women often ask to be working for free. And that's why we had to make a stand, and we said, no, we are going to pay them for their knowledge, for their effort, for their coming. So it was actually to move it on from all angles and to create the change.
Can I ask you, Yael, was there resistance to these women coming and speaking? Did you have to, there was resistance?
Yes.
And how did you navigate that? Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah. So, we speak about modern Orthodoxy is one group, but of course it's not, or national religious. And of course it's a spectrum. So it was very interesting to see, because there are also some Orthodox shuls that are more, in Hebrew, I would say, mishatfim. I won't say that it's that there is equality, but women can take part more substantially than in regular Orthodox shuls. Even them were they were asking for scholars to come to them, because for them it was an opportunity to call more people to come in. And in more conservative shuls, so it was a negotiation. It was and there was a lot of energy was into finding the right match to the shul. Like we would ask them to understand what would work well, what their interests, and try to find the right match. And often in places that didn't have or had that, the first deal was a very big deal. Sometimes I was asked to join a board meeting in order to convince. Sometimes they would ask to interview the scholar before. There were a lot of negotiations. There was actually a yeshuv that I got a letter from a lawyer saying that we're not allowed to advertise the name of the Rabbanit who is coming to their yeshuv. And it was really a lot of politics around it, but that's also what made me understand that we are making a change, like something is moving. And it felt like, I felt like doing 100 bar mitzvah at the same Shabbat. and I wouldn't know what would go on. I would wait till, like in Modi'in, I would run around all the places that would have scholars, and in some of the Shabbatot I couldn't, there were too many, but at least I saw 4 or 5 if I could. And but that's how you create a change. And as I said before, like you want to stay in and not go too much out, and it's really the balance. Like you have to aim high, but you wanna do small steps. You understand that a show that never had a woman speaking, just having that is a great achievement, and from that you can move on. You can't make a too big gap. Like it has to be gradually if you want it really to be successful and continue for long.
Yeah, how do they say in Hebrew? Kitzat, kitzat, right? Little by little.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I totally hear what you're saying. So your focus is, Kolach's focus is mostly on modern Orthodoxy, but do you collaborate at all with the other Orthodox communities, Haredi, Sephardi, Mizrahi women in Israel as well?
Definitely, yes. All of the above. So if I'll start closest, as I said, if we try to define the national religious community in Israel, so I would suggest that the more liberal, more to the left, not politically but religiously, is places you could see, you would find lots of Kolech members.
Yeah.
On the right side of that map, you would say what you have Chardalim. But and actually, it's interesting to see that the issue of women and how they participated, take part in the community, that's the pinnacle question. That's the question that defined the difference between right and left in national religious community. But it's very interesting to see that I feel that we managed to influence also that part. And I feel that sometimes that part feels threatened. I remember one of the Shabbatot Dorshot Tov that we did in the past, about 4 years ago, one of the main rabbis of the more Chavdali part was interviewed. And one of the questions was, why don't you like Shabbat Dorshot Tov? And he answered that his wife gave a lot of shiurim, but they don't need to announce it, and they don't need to make it public, and she's talking just for women, and that's the way it should be. But you know what? I feel that it just shows that they see it and they influenced by it. And I can also see that when nowadays, when in the Chardali group, and that right side, you can see that when they publish things, I can see more and more women taking part. So I can see that we are making a difference there. Sephardi women, we always in dialogue, and we were like, when I was in Kolech, we were having actually a beautiful dialogue with a group that called Arevot. They were making a Beit Midrash Mizrahi for women, and we had a year program that we worked together and try to raise issues and understand differences and things that are common between us. And Haredi women, we were working actually quite closely together. I feel that they are like 20 years behind us, like we are 20 years behind the public, in the general public. So as I said, it's a conservative community, and so therefore changes taking time and taking also a certain work in order to create that change. So we worked a lot together. We had a court case that we were filing a court case against Radio Kol Barama, a Haredi radio channel that didn't let women speak. Not even sing. I'm not talking about singing, but talking. They didn't let women talk, and we filed against them, and we won. And it took many years. It was a very long court case, and in the end we won. And there was a chunk of money that the Ministry of Mishpatim, Law, Ministry of Law, was giving, there was like they had to pay like $1 million shekel, and they divided this $1 million shekel to a whole lot of nonprofits, including Kolech. So a lot of organizations were able to enjoy it. And also to create the change that they understood that even in the Haredi channels, they cannot just, not let women talk and be part.
Yeah.
So,
it requires a tremendous amount of patience, I would imagine, again, to refer to our library, if any of you want to check out last month, we spoke with Meg Sullivan, who talked about the value of impatience. But I understand in the work that you're doing, working within the community, like you said, little by little, it just requires so much patience and perseverance to know that you're making that change in baby steps along the way. There were a few questions in the chat. I think some people are familiar with the Orthodox movement here in New York, and where women now are being ordained as rabbis in the Orthodox community, Yeshivat Maharat. Is that something that is happening in Israel as well?
Definitely, yes. We have about 5 places that women are being ordained. And more than that, we have Baruch Hashem, Rabbanit Shira Marili Mervis. She was appointed a Rabbanit, head of a community in Efrat. That was about over a year ago. So there is definitely more and more women that are taking these roles. Also in Israel, they managed to learn in a high level. There are more and more young women who are after high school going to learn in lots of midrashot. Also, I know young women who are coming to Israel to learn here. And there are more and more opportunities to do that. If I compare it to the time, like when I finished my shirut leumi, or even before, there was not an option. Yeah. And now I can see with my girls, it's hard to choose because there are so many, not enough, because I understand from the places that are learning seriously Gemara, that there is not enough room, a lot applying, and not all of them are being able to enroll in, but it's definitely growing in a great way. It's what I feel that in order to create the real change, it has to do with education in early stages. And in Israel, boys start to learn Gemara in year 5 in elementary school, and the girls in a lot of schools, in a lot of religious schools, they still do not learn Gemara, only Mishnah, and only when they come to Midrasha after high school, then they start. And then that's a problem, because then there is a gap between men and women, and it takes years till you manage to balance this. I feel it now. I have a son who did 7 years in Yeshivat Sder, and now often I sit with him and I learn. And, you can't compare. I feel that he was very lucky to learn properly, and he knows his knowledge is substantive. And my daughter is just a year and a half below him, just has much less opportunity.
Yeah.
But at least now when people want it, there is the opportunity, they can do it. But I feel, going back to what I said about elementary school, we should get to the stage that girls are starting to learn Gemara at the same time as boys, and then it will be easier in later stages to get to a higher level. And also, Kolech was also part of appealing to the Supreme Court in asking to let women who were ordinated to pass the tests of the rabbinic courts. And so far, they don't let women do that. Now, the rabbinic court, the Supreme Court decided that they need to let women do it, and they're now negotiating in what way it's going to happen, but it's in the process. And these things are happening. The beginning was with Midah, with purity. They said they took purposely with ITIM and other organizations, we took topics that are obvious and clear that women should know about it, and no-brainer. But for sure, these women are being tested on Shabbat and Avelut and other topics, and therefore they should and they will, in Yirtzeh Hashem, they will be cast on all of that as well. They're doing it now, but inside all the midrashot that they're learning, the idea is to have one test for men and women in Israel to ordinate them according to the Rabbanut. That's what, of course, we're aiming.
As it should be, as it should be. And for those of you who need a little help with definitions, please do check out the chat because Eva, thank you so much for putting some definitions in there. So you've now moved on from Kolach, and you're still out there in the world doing fabulous things. How do you continue to leverage your leadership toward this social action that you're hoping to bring about for the Jewish feminist community?
So now I'm doing mentoring for the Mandela Institute. And what I'm also busy on, I'm organizing actually a roundtable about Mamzerut for a Center for Women's Justice. So I was very, very lucky to get to know and work with Susan Weiss, which is on the first cohort. And so I did my internship at Yad Leisha, as she was the head of Yad Leisha. Later on, I joined her in founding Center for Women's Justice. And actually now I'm back working with her, which I feel very honored. And Center for Women's Justice actually working now on a very cutting edge topic of Mamzerut.
And can you tell us a little bit about that? Because not everyone might be familiar with what a Mamzerut. Sure. Yeah, that would be great.
Sure. So according to Orthodox Jewish law, a mamzer is a child born from certain biblically prohibited unions, such as incest and adultery, regardless of whether one of the partners was forced into such a union. And mamzer has an enormous repercussions because mamzer can only marry another mamzer, and all subsequent generations will inherit the mamzer status. So in Israel, mamzerut is not only simply a private religious matter, since the state rabbinate holds the monopoly of issues of personal status. So mamzer is a legal status. So the more problem is not even if you are a mamzer, but if you're a suspected mamzer, because they are tracked on secret state blacklists of individuals banned from marrying other Jews. And since there is no civil marriage or divorce in Israel, this means that mamzer cannot legally marry another Jew in Israel. And that's a very, very bad situation. So it's not something theoretical, it's something real. And Center for Women's Justice have a few cases in court about it. And therefore, Rabbinic leader Rivka Lubitch, actually from Center for Women's Justice, gathered a forum of about 100 people that are influential. And the idea is to find a systematic solution to the problem because it exists now. And also we have to understand that this problem is actually sits in the base of the whole issue of marriage and divorce, because when women come to court, to rabbinic court, to get divorced, the main worry is that if the husband won't give his wife a get out of his free will, then if she's remarrying, the kids she's going to have are going to be mamzerim, and that's something that everybody is afraid of. And also, a lot of mamzerim in Israel are happening because women deny their get. And then in some states, they want to move on with their life. And so they found another spouse. But if they have children from that spouse, then kids are going to be mamzerim. And the idea is, it's a very pioneering thing that even somebody is willing to talk about it, and that's why it's really something very new. We started by trying to change the law. The idea is that there is a law in Israel because because everything that has to do with personal status goes to the rabbinic courts, then the halacha is the one that decides what's happening to them. There is a law in Israel that if a kid was born even up to 10 months after the wife got divorced, the kid would be written under the name of the ex-husband. And originally it's being accepted as that actually they're trying to keep the child from becoming a mamzer. But it creates a whole lot of problems because what's written in his identity card is that the father, everybody knows that he is not the father. And as a result, for instance, he's responsible for his medical care and he doesn't want to do anything to do with him. So you have kids that grow up not knowing or are not able to live in good relationship with their actual parents. And the idea is to try and break it by saying, like in law of return, the law that has to do with who is Jewish is allowed to come to Israel is not necessarily the same as who is Jewish according to Orthodox law should apply here. So, and the idea is to try and say it's better that this kid would be written, that his biological father would be written as his father, so he would live in a good environment rather than to write in a way that causes him a lot of other problems. So the roundtable I'm organizing with Israel Democracy Institute that is about to take place in March 30th in Israel Institute will bring together professionals also in halacha, in academia, in activism to see how to break these rules and try to create a change in order to create a change which is even bigger, like to try and help people who are mamzerim, because one of the main problems is unlike women who cannot receive their religious divorce certificate, they're willing most times, not always, but most times they won't have a problem, especially if they're released, they will come in front of television or journalists and will talk about it, whether mamzerut is it's a taboo. Even not religious people are afraid of it, and people think it's theoretical, it's not real, and no one is willing to put their face on and say that they're mamzerim. And therefore it's something that everybody is afraid of, but you advocate for clients that are no way they'll stand in front and say what they have. So they need somebody to fight for them. And so it's, if we manage to change that will have also great influence over marriage and divorce in Israel.
Yeah. And it doesn't surprise me that it's, the feminist community that's taking up this issue, because although a mamzer may be a boy, a man, it's so tied to the woman. And you have the fathers, whoever they may be, who still can go about their lives or be absolved from responsibility or not have to worry about it, but it's all connected through the mother, and the mother looking after her children and her grandchildren and her whole lineage from there. So it doesn't surprise me at all that you've waded into this space. How, as you've made your transition from running an organization to being a more independent leader now, and also looking at your opportunities for the future, how has being a part of JWFNY's collective supported you in that process?
So first of all, I feel that there is some sort of a generational thing. Like in the first cohort, you have Susan, which I see as a mentor, and she's very unique person that can see far. And I remember being with her many years ago, and she's saying things, and everybody's like, "What are you talking about?" And now it's obvious for everybody. And she has this ability to look far. And so I'm the I'm the next generation. In cohort 3, you have Esti Shushan from the Haredi world, we just mentioned, and we were cooperating on things together as I was working on Kolech, and they're finding the Haredi feminism is finding its way in. So I can see a continuation, at least on the Israeli side. I feel it's a great opportunity, and it's actually in time of transition and time of COVID and crazy time in the world. It's actually a place of peace, of feeling safe. And it's actually quite remarkable that we found in COVID so many things that we thought there is only one way to do things. And we found ourselves that actually most of the women there I know only from Zoom, but it's nice to see that we feel close and we feel we can share and we feel we can, there is something going between us that is more than just, meeting once a month, which I feel that it actually is helpful. And I also find fascinating learning from what's going on with American Jewry. And I feel that, it's one thing to know about it theoretically, it's another thing to experience it every month and to be in a relationship that really brings a better understanding of what each of us is facing and one towards each other of what's going on between Israel and the States. And so I feel that for me, it's a great place of learning.
Thank you. That's so beautiful. And it's what we're hoping to create, right? This place of collaboration, of synergy, of partnership, of we call, strategic force multiplication, of bringing together people in similar spaces so that together what they can do is better. So thank you for validating that by your experience. And I'm gonna leave you with a big question, which we won't even begin to answer, I think, but I think something to get us looking forward. Next week is International Women's Day, so it's like a moment to think about this. But what is your vision for gender equity in the next 10 years, either in Israel or worldwide?
That's a very big question.
Right. Why not? Big vision, small steps, right?
Yeah.
That's what you said.
So I'll start from inside. I'll start by saying that I want to see a woman chief rabbi in Israel. And I want to see a woman rabbinic judge in Israel. And in Yirtzeh Hashem, it's going to happen. And it will make me very happy if it's happening in the coming 10 years, definitely. And we should aim there. And I believe that it's going to happen. And to the world, and crazy days like that, we should have more women prime ministers and presidents. We should have more women around the making decision tables. And in COVID, we felt it very strongly, at least in Israel, the lack of it was strongly felt. And also in working force, we felt actually, again, because of COVID, we realized that we can work differently. And if a working environment was built originally for men, so now we see that actually this flexibility of combining home and work is something that can work, and men and women should benefit from it. Unfortunately, in Israel, we're dealing with higher levels of violence towards women, and COVID made it worse. And I hope that the state of Israel and start to deal with it and really give the money they promised to the issue and see it as a pandemic that needs to be treated. I can go on and on like that. but I
Well,
feel that
I love some of your visions. I just love them and I share them. So thank you, Yael. It has been such a pleasure speaking with you today. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for the work that you do. We're always grateful for where you are on the front lines of feminism in Israel.
thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Yael. Yael, we're not waiting 10 years for that. We need it. We need it sooner than
That's for
10 years,
now.
please. You know, we don't have to hope that things will be different when we have leaders like Yael who will guide us in Israel and all over the world. We can actually believe that change will happen, which gives us all hope to get out of bed in the morning and do what we need to do. So we're so inspired by Yael's leadership and extraordinary story, and hope that all of you are as well. And if you've been with us before, you know we always like to leave you with a few actions you can take, and we'll email those to you tomorrow. For now, please save the date for 3 upcoming events. Tomorrow morning from 10 to 11 Eastern Time, we're sponsoring a briefing on the real and existential threat facing our sisters in Ukraine by JWFNY collective member, Project Kesher CEO Karen Grossman-Gershon. Project Kesher, as many of you may know, has a long history of working with Jewish women throughout Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine. There's no cost to attend, but you have to register, and Eve is going to put the registration link in the chat. Also, next Tuesday on March 15th from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Time, Rabbi Mira Rivera will lead a Purim Jewish Learning Center, the Ganze Megillah, the whole Megillah, when our people were the other. And that's also open to everyone at no charge, but you have to register. Registration, link in the chat. And then on April 27th from 11 to 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, we'll kick off a year-long celebration of our 25th anniversary. We'll commemorate the remarkable achievements of our past and announce a bold plan for our future. And we'll also announce the next 10 social entrepreneurs chosen for the 4th cohort of the collective. Also in the chat is a link to sign up for that. Now, Yael is able to stay on. So if you have additional questions or just want to have a deeper conversation, just stay on this main screen. Closed captioning doesn't work in breakout rooms, so we're just all going to stay here. And for those of you who can't stay, thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing everyone soon. Thank you. Awesome. Well, hello. Yael, so awesome. Like, so moved by all of the things that you said. And interesting, it's such a, in some ways, such a dark topic. And yet I don't feel dark. Like, I don't feel like I don't feel like it's impossible. I don't feel like we can't do it. I feel like there's opportunity here for people to actually understand the world that you live in and understand that there's a way to support women who are not just Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox, but women all over the world who are being held hostage. So what is it like, if you had to narrow it down into one thing, like one item, what's the takeaway for us right now? What do we need to do?
I'm not sure I understood the question.
Sorry. Yeah, too many words. If you could give us, if you were the boss of the world and the boss of us, what one thing would you ask us to do to move your work forward? All right, 3 things, whatever, how many things you have.
Okay.
How can we support you?
Okay. I'll be happy to support Kolech and to support Center for Women's Justice. Join the Forum of Mamzerut. what I feel in Israel is that something very substantive that needs to happen, but it's more what I feel is that the law about marriage and divorce should change substantially. Like we should have choice in divorce, in choosing how to get married and how to get divorced, and we should have more than one way to do it. And that I feel that there are lots of organizations of that dealing with marriage and divorce because we haven't managed to solve it. Unlike lots of other things we have managed to do and to achieve, this is something that is stuck for many years. It's actually something that I'm hopeful that maybe with the different government that we have now, that finally things that has to do with state and religion is something that is being changed, as we can see in kashrut and we can see in converting, and hopefully also in marriage and divorce. So I'm hopeful that's something that for me is very, very substantial, and I want to believe that that's something that also we need to move. But I'm not sure that I answered your question.
You did, absolutely, absolutely. And this isn't for me, actually, this time isn't for me to interview you because it's just not. So let's hear from other people. What questions do you have for Yael, or comments that you want to share, or questions for anyone about anything? Barbara.
Sorry, I came in late. I had another meeting, so I apologize. So I just heard the end of what you were saying. But I'm curious to know how the Orthodox, have they lost their grip at all in any of the issues that you're talking about? And have the less conservative Israelis had gotten any power in terms of marriage, divorce, holidays, traffic, anything? Does it make sense what I'm saying?
You're asking how is that?
Well, how is it, are the Orthodox still so much in power that, and well, have they lost any of their grip? Are they less powerful than they were under Netanyahu?
Right now, they're not in government. They're not part of the coalition. The Haredi parties are not part of the coalition. So it has a substantial, I mean, it's different. And actually, a lot is happening right now. Let's start a step back. I think that if you look at the population of Israel, what you would find that there, as much as there are lots of, it's more than secular, it's very traditional. It's very, very traditional. I mean, the percentage of traditional, I think that's the majority. And that's something that it's a group, the traditional is not necessarily a group that was counted many years ago. And they were just being part of the secular, but they're not. And it's that's actually a main part of Israeli society. And as a result, I think that even if these people are not exactly observant, they want to know that above them, there is some sort of religion into the state. And as a result, they let in the control of Haredi, which grew with the years. It wasn't like that many years ago. It grew with the years. And it's very interesting to see the history and to understand it, the history and the social history, to understand how, you think about it. For instance, Ben Gurion let men who are learning Torah not to go to the army. If you look into it, you realize that he didn't think that religious community would stay. He thought that with the time there will be less and less. He didn't thought that this actually population is growing substantially and becoming very, very strong in Israel. And now when you look ahead, you're talking about percentages that are so substantive that therefore there is so much attempt now from the government to say we need Haredi men and women in the working force. We can't allow ourselves otherwise. So a lot of these things, I think, were done without too much thinking, or the thought would be that the outcome would be very different. And now we find ourselves in a different situation. And with the monopoly of the Haredim over the rabbinic courts, that's a real problem, and therefore we'll have every time in recent years we tried to deal with it. When we got to the government, we got stuck because Netanyahu felt that he needs to keep the Haredim in, and that the payment that he had to pay, and therefore the feeling was that you come to the Knesset and nothing is really happening. It's all a game. Nothing is happening, and nobody's willing to touch marriage and divorce, for instance. Now that's not. Now you feel that something has happened. You feel that they opened a whole lot of frontiers, and they need to choose. And sometimes they're going to say we'll do kashrut and we'll do converting first, and then we'll deal with other issues. I can also hear that in the back, but you feel that actually it's time for a change. But we also know from history there was when it was there was a time, a few years of change in government, but then it was too short, and everything that tried to change, it was changed again very quickly afterwards. So you want to create change that would last for long. So it's complicated in this sense.
Yeah, the whole thing is very complicated, right?
I have a question, Yael, about what you just said. So if that's the case, then how do you make lasting change in Israel?
So I feel that's the place that you feel the small steps work. And then if you compare what happened 10 years ago to now, 20 years ago, then you feel that we have changed and things are moving ahead. And it's also something that in order to work with these topics for the long term, you have to celebrate the small successes that are happening along the way. Because, I don't know, first, I have to say that I feel that certain things that has to do with the injustices, things must change. It just that I feel that that's the right thing, and we can't just sit aside and not do anything. We have to make sure that these things change. And as we know, things can change from below and from above, and usually it starts from below. So if you're managing to get to people and talk to them and explain to them, if people understand that the next, like for me, for instance, if I believe that if I want to do things for change, I'm worried that the next generation, my kids wouldn't be interested. If I want to make sure that religion would be important to my kids, then this adjustment should happen. It has to, because otherwise you can't keep, there are certain things that women are quiet in, behind the curtain. That's good for 50, 100 years ago. You cannot have women that are very talented and they learn a lot and they can be so much and they can't be nothing when they come to shul. It doesn't work. If I want them to make sure that they're going to get to shul, they need to pray loud, they need to sing, they need to be active, they need to be part. And as a result, there's no other choice to my mind. So you have to talk to people. You have to make sure that they hear, that they see, that the girls see models of, if I'm talking about rabbinic rabbis, they should see these examples and therefore learn that it's possible.
I am so behind that. It's like grandparents who say, I don't know why my grandchildren aren't Jewish. And I think, well, do you have Shabbat dinner? Or do you invite them to synagogue? Or do you send them books? But instead they just are, they're beating their chest. Like, why is this happening? And I think that our teenagers are not going to put up with this. Like, they just aren't going to put up with not being allowed to share their voices. They just won't. I mean, even the girls, I've seen girls in all denominations in the United States. We saw girls at Google who are just amazing that they are working in the mainstream and making it work, that they can be religious and do all of the obligations that they've taken on, right? Like, that's really powerful. They're not going to put up with this. You can't talk. They're going to leave. And that, I think, is a challenge. People are trying to get, other people not to leave Judaism, but if you hold on too tight to anything, they're just going to rebel. So Neil has a question or a comment or something. Hi.
Hi, I feel like the outsider.
Welcome.
So I have this is impressionistic. So I've spent, a lot of time in Israel. I was United Jewish Appeal senior staff. I took thousands of people to Israel. I helped develop Birthright, blah, blah, blah. The Orthodox folks that I've met in Israel, in the settler community in the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, and the Orthodox in Jerusalem, and let's forget the rest of the country, the women all had 5 to 10 children. So one of the issues in the United States is, how would women get involved in careers and childbearing at the same time? Major issue, major issue. How do you do that in Israel with Orthodox women with 5 to 10 kids? I was in one house, by the way, in Jerusalem. It was fantastic. There was a 19-year-old daughter who was taking care of the newborn baby with 12 kids in between. And they were as happy as you could be and all the rest. But how is that mother of 13 children going to become the chief rabbi of Israel? And then one more question, and that's a big deal out of Brooklyn that I have a lot to do with. And that I run the endowment fund for Stuyvesant High School in New York. I'm a consultant to the DOE, blah, blah, blah. The education of women, how is that in Israel for the women that are going to have to take the roles that you take, Yael? In other words, are they getting educated as well as the men? Are they getting educated as well as the rest of the country? Anyway, I apologize for not being too precise, because I'm an activist involved in all of this, but I'm not as educated about it as I should be. So help me.
Okay, I'll try. The first question was about the so many children, right?
5 to 10 kids, yeah.
Yeah. So I think that, first, okay, about the Haredi community. It's a community that is going through tremendous changes, and you have more and more Haredi people who wants to have the good life and that don't want to have so many children, and you can say it's happening. And a lot of them either living or staying in, they're like, sometimes they would be on the fringe of the community. So something very substantive is happening there. Nobody knows how it's going to end up, and I'm not a prophet, but there is no doubt that there is a change. There is a change, and you can feel it now, and we'll see it substantially in a few years' time. And there are more schools in the Haredi community that now are teaching. Also, the girls are learning more like general knowledge. The problem is actually with the men, that usually they don't learn any general knowledge. But this is also changing. And there are more and more schools that are now learning to do bagruyot, to do final tests, and they do start to learn. So that's something that is changing. And also in Judea and Samaria, I mean, if you follow what happened to the kids you were talking about, a lot of them stay in and some of them not, and they have different amount of children. So it's something that is changing. And the truth is, I grew up in national religious community. I had in my high school, I was in a class that was great achievers, and there are 6 doctors and 3 biologists and 7 lawyers. And you know what? We had a meeting about 10 years ago, and I was surprised to see how many of them have so many children. I have only 4, and I was part of the small families. So I think in this sense, I think that men are also participating more today. Some would say it, and some would hide it, but that's actually what's happening, even in the Haredi community. After the door is closed, the balance have changed, and they understand that they need to be part. So I think that there are lots of social changes that are happening that would allow these women to get to where they should get, and I believe they will.
Thank you. Wow, though, that's a great place to end, I think. Thanks everyone for staying on. It's so interesting what you're doing, Yael, and so important. As you know, I loved actually how you talked about the collective, also about this through line of the generations, which I hadn't thought of, but of course it makes complete sense. And if anybody else, hi Francis, if anybody else has questions or comments, then you can reach Yael and reach out through us if you want. Okay, we're good. We're good. All right. Have a good afternoon wherever